Good afternoon, and welcome to the Akron Roundtable. I'm John Williams, Board Chair and President of the Akron Roundtable Board of Directors. Akron Roundtable is proudly promoting community dialogue and networking for the past 45 years. Our mission is to present speakers who inform and educate listeners on diverse topics of importance to the region, the nation, and the world. While we typically enjoy meeting in person, today's format is indeed a different but effective venue for Akron Roundtable. We are delighted to meet you virtually. So please join in our conversation by participating in the Q&A at the end of the program. We sincerely thank the Akron Summit County Public Library for continuing to host our virtual events. Today's today's program will be broadcast on Thursday, January 27th at 8 p.m. on WKSU 89.7 FM. It is our privilege to welcome to the roundtable today Jodi Wellman, leadership coach and facilitator. Her topic is, how many Monday mornings do we have left? We are thankful for the generous support Akron Roundtable receives from sponsors, patrons, and subscribers. Please visit our website at akronroundtable.org if you would like to make a contribution. On our website, you will also find a list of our board members and staff. I'd like to take a moment to thank you, the staff and board members, for their hard work. I am very fortunate to serve alongside such an outstanding group of community leaders dedicated to the Akron Roundtable mission. Please mark your calendar for our next event, Thursday, February 17th, when we transition back to in-person talks at the Quaker Station. We will present part one of our two-part point-counterpoint series on voting. Part two will take place on March 17th. You can read more about our upcoming speakers by going to our website. Also, on the podcast page and our website, you can listen to past Akron Roundtable programs. We are grateful to the University of Akron and its EXL Center for Experiential Learning for sponsoring our podcast series. Again, our website address is akronroundtable.org. For those of you on social media, please follow us at Akron Roundtable on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and use hashtag Akron Roundtable to continue the conversation. In just a moment, our speaker, Jodi Wellman, will be introduced by former Akron Roundtable board member, Elizabeth Sheeler. Following her presentation, Jodi has generously agreed to take questions from our audience. Pamela Hickson Stevenson will coordinate the Q&A portion of the program. To facilitate your questions, we are using Asker technology. Asker technology enables you to submit questions via mobile devices. Questions may be submitted at any time during our program and will be forwarded for review during the Q&A portion. Watch the chat box for instructions should you need them. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Sheeler.
Thanks, John. I am so honored and excited to welcome my friend and colleague, Jodi Wellman, to the Akron Roundtable today. Jodi is a speaker, leadership coach, and facilitator who focuses on helping others live lives worth living. She has 17 years of corporate leadership experience, leading private CEO advisory boards and coaching executives at businesses and organizations like American Express, Aon, the Booth School of Business, and BMW on how to work well and live even better. Jodi is a certified professional coactive coach and an ICF professional certified coach. She has a master's of applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, where she is also an assistant instructor and facilitator in the Penn Resilience Program. While studying at Penn, Jodi expanded her interest in and conducted research on the meaningful contemplation of death. Her capstone project on the topic, titled Memento Mori, Reflecting on Mortality to Inspire Vitality and Meaning in Life, received a coveted Published with Distinction award. On top of all that, Jodi is a talented artist, and I can say from experience, she makes a mean chocolate brownie. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share her brownies with you today, but I do encourage you to check out her website or follow her on social media. And I think she will have some of her art included in her presentation today to see all of her drawings featured there. Her clever and witty artwork is a wonderful accompaniment to Jodi's message to make the most out of your life while you are still living. Jodi is insightful, inspiring, and has a great sense of humor. Not exactly what you would expect from someone who has studied death and admits herself that she may have a bit of a morbid curiosity on the subject. And as Jodi will certainly remind us, our clocks are all ticking. So without further ado, I am so pleased to introduce Jodi Wellman.
Well, wow, Beth, thank you for that warm and welcoming introduction. I am excited to be here. And that whole mention about brownies, I have to say, I'm normally one that's embracing the whole virtual thing, but it does make me want to be in person with you and share some portion of brownies. So maybe we'll look for that in the future. How's that? Okay, well, why don't we dive in? Beth has already introduced me, so I don't need to tell you my name, but I think I do need to tell you that I have 1,933 Mondays left, if I play my cards right. She already mentioned that I work as a leadership coach, and so I'm not going to go into detail about that, but what I do want to tell you is about my mission in life, which is to help us make the most of our time while we are lucky enough to be above ground, to not squander it. And that's why I say here, can't we all just live squander-free lives? We are prone to take our lives for granted. I know I do it. We do it naturally as human beings. And so maybe our time together today can help us snap out of that. That's my goal. Everything I talk about today will be rooted in science, specifically the science of positive psychology, which is the study of what makes life worth living. Only, of course, like Beth noted, I do tend to add a little bit of a morbid twist to it, but I promise we won't make it overly morbid together. What are we going to talk about in our remaining time here? We're going to talk about your death. Yeah, we're going to talk about your life. And then we're going to talk about what's next, meaning, what do you want to do with this information, right? You're here for good reason. Your hour of your life is precious today, like every other day. And so I want today to be more than just interesting, inspirational. I want it to feel actionable for you. So I will make you, I'll make you do a little work. I'll have you think about what you want to do with this next. Okay, I have a question for you first off, and I'd like for you, if you have a pen and paper makes things real rather than just thinking. If you're a typer, type, that's fine, but here's my question for you. Okay, on the ladder of life, I'd like you to choose where you are today. So it ranges from a 10 would be, this is like the best possible life for you, like things could not get better. Whereas 1 is the worst possible life, things couldn't get worse. Where do you think you are right now? Pick a number, any number. I'm the type that uses decimal places, use as many decimal places as you'd like. Okay, and then my next question is, think about your life in 5 years. Where do you anticipate you will be on this ladder of life in 5 years? Pick a number. Okay. So what I'd like for you to do, in fact, I'm going to open up the chat because I'd like to have it be as interactive as possible while we're meeting together. Thank you. Some of you have already put in numbers. I love you. Thank you, Tracy, Reynolds. I love it. If, by the way, you want to not have people know anything, if I ask you questions, because I'm going to get nosy, you can always just chat me directly. You don't have to do it to everybody, right? You can just do it to my name, Jodi. But I'm looking at some numbers here. We've got a nice range, right? Ranging from 8 to 10. Wow, 10 life is that's pretty great. 2 want to move to 9. I've got a 7 and 8, a 7. I like how this is actually seemingly a statistically representative sample of the United States, because the average in the US is a 7. What I'm more curious about, actually, I want to know where you are today. I'm interested, but it's about, where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? So my hope for you is that you think you're going to be even one tiny little bit up the ladder, and it doesn't need to be a full rung, but a portion of it. And that's really what we're talking about today, right? Is having a sense that the future is going to be bright, that we can make it bright. And so my path to getting there, to actually making this seem real, is through talking about what might be unexpected. And so let's just continue with that conversation. It is right here. Our Grim Reaper friend has a message for us. You're totally going to die. I know you do not need a spoiler alert for this message. This is a well-known message. As humans, we are the only animals that are uniquely aware of our mortality. And to be quite honest, it usually doesn't sit well with us, right? So how long do we really have? Let's quantify this issue here. Men typically live to 78. Women typically live till 83. And yes, I did draw 83 candles on that women's cake. And I actually think it cost me a year of my life, but it was fun to do. So maybe it was worth it. That's really roughly how long we have. And so now my question for you, the title of our time together today, of course, is how many Mondays for you do you have left? And now I'm going to make you do the work. So here's the calculation. It's super simple. I'd love for you to just, use the calculator on your phone if you need it here. Take 78 if you're male, 83 female. If you don't identify with either, pick 80 in the middle and minus your age. Then what I want you to do is add in a bonus year because you're part of this whole Akron Roundtable, and that's worth a year of life bonus. That number, you're going to multiply by 52 weeks, right? And that is your total number of Mondays left, my friend, on average. Many of us get many, many more. Many of us don't get that many. But here is this is the purpose of our conversation. We get about 4,000 weeks in our lives. And that explains the name 4,000 Mondays. So you might have only 260 Mondays left or 2,600, or like my dad, I have a calculator on my website that calculates your Mondays if you're not into the math. And my lovely sweet dad did it, and he got minus 260 because he is in fact older than the age of 78, the average for men. And he's cute. He thought he broke the calculator. So I want to know, I'm going to get nosy. Thanks. Some of you are already plugging in your Mondays. I told you mine. I'd love to hear a few of you. We've got, again, a nice range here. In and around the 2600s, 1800s, over 3000. That's a bonus. 1800s, 2100. Thank you. By the way, most people are not really interested in telling people their age. And here I am getting extremely nosy about it. You don't have to put it in the chat, but you're welcome to, please. And by the same idea, you can chat me directly. So my question for you is here as a result of doing that calculation is, well, so what? Are we just going to sit here and wallow in the fact that we are on a countdown timer? No. The point that I want us to get to is this idea of how do we actually want our time to be, right? So I want to tell you more about this concept that is called memento mori. And Beth alluded to it when she introduced me here today. I have fallen in love with this phrase. Memento mori is an old Latin concept, and it translates to remember that we must die. And Steve Jobs, in his commencement speech that he did for Stanford years ago, I don't know if anybody has seen it. It's fabulous. I kind of insist that you have to watch it tonight before bed, especially the section where he does talk about this topic. He has this line that I love. He says, "Death is very likely the single best invention of life." Reflecting on death can be the spark plugs that we need in order to, quite frankly, fully participate in our lives, to take that jump start that we sometimes need. I have that sense of urgency that just doesn't come from not thinking about it at all, which is really what we do, right? We need to function in this world. And so we try not to dwell on the negative things. I'm not suggesting we dwell in a ho-hum way. But what I am suggesting is that we use this concept to our advantage. And so don't take my word for it alone. I think some of the most motivated clients I've worked with are those who have had brushes with death, like maybe cancer diagnoses or close call car accidents. These are people who have experienced what psychologists call the roar of awakening, right? It's the wake-up call of death. These people have an outrageous appreciation for their lives in ways that the rest of us walking around who haven't had a close call with death don't even really know of, right? They have a clarity about the things that matter to them, and they're also clear on what really doesn't matter anymore. And research consistently shows that people who have had any kind of experience towards and in and around death, they don't waste time attacking the problem of living life fully. And some of you in this virtual room here may have had your own experience. You might have fallen off a roof, You might be in remission from cancer. You might not be in remission, but you might have a really tough illness. And I am venturing to bet, based on my experience and through research, that it has created that resurgence of, wow, I am aware now with more clarity than ever before that I want to make the most of my time. And that's what we're after here, is the wake-up call that spotlights the value of life without having to go through the drama or the trauma of a near-death experience. And that is what I believe this memento mori concept can do for us. Part of what we're talking about is called prospect theory. Some of you might be aware of it from an economic background, perhaps, and it's the idea that we are more motivated by the risk of losing something than we are by the possibility of gaining something of similar value. So the idea of living life more fully isn't quite as motivating without this shadow of death showing up to highlight all that we have to lose. So imagining that you might miss out if you were to pass away sooner than later, if you might miss out on maybe your kids' weddings, or that trip to the Galapagos you always wanted to take, or writing that book that you've always had in you, or running the marathon that you've always wanted to run. These are things that usually will spark the motivation. We don't want to not do it. We don't want to miss out necessarily. So life is more precious because we are bound by the limits of time. And again, not thinking about that means we're going to miss out potentially on some of that boost that we need to live life fully. And I'm aware here, so much of what we're talking about is avoiding regrets, right? Getting to the end and avoiding thinking about all the paths that you could have taken, all the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. And I find it fascinating that there are regret researchers. There are people out there who study regrets for a living. Fascinating. They have realized that regrets can be powerfully effective if we tap into them in advance and then edit our lives along the way to prevent them. And my question for you is, if you had a compendium of lost and unfulfilled dreams, might you have a page, maybe a chapter, maybe several volumes? You know, my mom passed away in her late 50s, which has in many ways motivated the work that I do, because unfortunately that dear sweet woman, she passed away with, I think, her own set of many compendiums of unfulfilled dreams and regrets. And it sparked me to say, hey, I don't want to get to the end and realize that I have all these paths that I could have taken that I would regret not taking. Here's my question for you right now. If you, for some reason, ended up on your deathbed imminently, let's pretend it's painless and peaceful. We don't want to make this gory. What regrets might you have? Things that maybe you didn't do. Usually our regrets are things we didn't do rather than things we did do, right? And I would love to hear from a couple of you. If you wouldn't mind maybe popping into the chat, I'd love to get a few examples. You know, many answers are consistent. You know, I asked this question around the globe, and the answers are similar in that people are usually longing for an experience that maybe they wanted and they haven't taken yet. So speaking Spanish, maybe playing the guitar. Great entries, Leanne. Thanks. Megan, not traveling more often, or no trip to Australia, Rob. Can't miss down under, right? Writing your book on the health of art. Oh, goodness, Macklin, I want to read that book. Traveling outside the US, Vanessa, yes. I want to be the first to call it right now. Man, this COVID is a pain in our butts, isn't it? COVID has absolutely gotten in the way of us living in such a way that we get to live regret-free lives. But I'm going to be a little bugger here, and I'm going to say that I was doing this work before COVID, and we had just as many regrets, about potential regrets, I should say, longings that maybe we haven't fulfilled yet. That you know, COVID is basically a pause button for us, but now I am urging us to make the plans beyond COVID, not remarrying, not living a richer, more fulfilling life, working too long. Sharon, thanks for saying it. You are not alone. There are numerous studies, and I find them fascinating. There's a certain regret researcher that asks people who are older in life, seniors at a certain stage of life, it's almost like a, if you could do it over assessment. And the number one thing people would do over if they could is not work so hard. There we go. And I'm saying this to a group of leaders and entrepreneurs, right? But hey, We're the guiltiest of all. Traveling, hiking, cooking more, not playing harder. Oh, love this. And I think thanks also, there's a comment about letting things upset me that are not important. Yeah, we do sweat the small stuff, don't we? And I ask you this, believe me, I don't want us to get mired in the details of things that are coulda, shoulda, wouldas. This is meant to be a, wait a sec, hold on to this. Let the idea be that, wait a second, if I only have, let's say 1,820 Mondays left in my life, and I recognize its scarcity, how can I use this to my advantage? How can I plan that trip to Australia? How can I book it? How can I start writing the book on the health of art? How can I really start working on not sweating the small stuff? Because we can take that action. I love this quote, it's never too late to be, which it might have been. So I've left this concept. Thanks to science, we are living longer than ever. Woohoo, lots more years. 4,000 weeks is longer than most of our parents' longevity projected, right? But my question is, do we have more life in our years? And I've come to look at life and how we use memento mori across two different spectrums of living wider and deeper. And let me tell you about it. I look at how we can widen our lives with vitality. And it's when we fill our lives with all of the fun, pleasure, and experiences life has to offer. Think of this as a continuum between being in a Netflix coma, like bored in an autopilot, all the way over to dying empty, getting an A+ in life for showing up, engaged, doing the things that we sometimes just kind of get lazy or disengaged and don't want to do. This is the liveliest version of your life. This can look like taking part in some of the artistic things we want to do, having fun at parties, trying new foods, or when was the last time you had caviar? I was thinking about that this morning. It's been many years. Playing the games, going on the picnics and having fun, going on vacations, trying the drinks. This is the life widening vitality fun stuff. And this is not to be confused, just so you know, because this is not living in autopilot, which is where most of us do tend to go back to, right? We get caught up in our routines more often than we like to admit. I like to call us, we're highly functioning zombies sometimes. I am one too. I don't say this with judgment. So that's widening our lives. Deepening our lives is with meaning. And I noticed how someone said in the chat that they also wanted to have a life where it felt more fulfilled and meaningful. And maybe this is the depth for you. So this is going from the feeling empty and sort of purposeless to feeling like your life has that sense of meaning. And it could include having that sense of gratitude, connection to something bigger that's bigger than us, tapping into your strengths, doing what you do best, connecting to other people, learning and growing. For many of you, that's like oxygen, giving. And so meaning is the axis that deepens us. Many of you are probably fans of Harvard Business Review, and I was fascinated by this question that came out, I think it was 18 months ago. If you could find a job that offered you consistent meaning, how much of your current salary would you be willing to forego to do it? They asked this, it was a survey just to Americans. And I want you to put it into the chat. What percent do you think? It was 9 out of 10 Americans. This was the average. And by the way, so I would just want to make this clear. 9 out of 10 Americans did say they would forfeit some of their income if it guaranteed meaning in their work. But what percent? How much are they really willing to give up? And this is what I want to see. If you can put some entries in the chat. If we were in person, I would give you brownies as prizes for the person who came closest. But I love this range. We're looking at some 30s, 25s, half, 75s, 50s. Yeah. I like, this isn't your number for you, but it's going to vary for each person. Here's the number I'm going to tell you, 23%. So I work with a group of leaders, and then they of course laughed and said, great, we get to pay our people 23% less now if we can just give them a little bit of meaning. It's like, this is not a cost saving endeavor. This is demonstrating how much meaning really does matter to us. And I think you feel this too. So what is really happening here is, I like there's an example from MacLeod. I'm doing it. I'm making 1/3 of what I was. Love that. Love that. I'm taking these axes and I'm putting them together on a framework, a way to look at your life. And when I do go through this, I'm going to do this fast. I just want you to think about where might you be in these quadrants. Vitally empty, of course, is where you have quite a bit of pleasure, but not a lot of meaning, right? It feels kind of empty inside. Meaningfully bored is where You do have a lot of meaning. That's amazing. But you are feeling empty on the joie de vivre. The dead zone is when you're lacking in both meaning and vitality. So, even we can be in the dead zone, by the way. I'm going to put my laser up here. You can be in the dead zone anytime you're just slipping below the meaning and vitality, right? Many of us have experienced that some last talk I did this week, someone said that they go into the dead zone multiple times a day. And hey, sometimes that's true. What we're striving for, of course, is to be anywhere plus on meaning and anywhere plus on vitality. And I want to be super clear here, right? I'm not trying to say that we have to max out every day. That's exhausting, right? That's all over social media. And there's sort of these admonishments of living your best life, almost as though it's like a judgment rather than an encouragement. And I want us to be relative. We got a lot going on, right? We got busy lives. I'm talking about making small nudges to nudge our lives a little wider and to make them a little deeper. Trust me, I won't stop you if you want to go hugely wide and hugely deep, but let's just be realistic. And so now how do we do this? I have 3 simple ideas before we wrap up our time here. The first one I think you're going to understand as probably leaders and managers in this group. You know the old adage, was it Tom Peters, I think, that said you can't manage what you can't measure? I think it was Tom Peters. Please correct me in the chat if I got Tom, if I misquoted Tom. But I have an assessment that, I'm going to be honest, it's 68 questions. It's deep. But if you want to do that, and it's sort of a manual way to identify areas where you are feeling particularly alive and where you're feeling kind of dead. And it really helps us to double down where we know we're living, do more of it. And if you notice in this assessment, for example, that, and I'll put my email up, you can email me directly. You don't even have to send me a love note. You can just say assessment in the email subject, and I'll just send it back to you today. But in this assessment, it might identify for you, all the areas where I identified feeling kind of dead, they were all around maybe my health, or maybe around my relationships, or maybe around my career. Sometimes it helps just to see it in black and white, So the number one area I'd recommend is diagnosing where you might be dead. The next thing is what I call dialing up the novelty. And as much as, yes, I wish this was the antidote to COVID, it's not, but most of the research I do is in and around the idea of novelty and how it's crucial for the human experience. We need variety in our daily experiences in order to have more positive emotional states. And I don't know about you guys, but don't you want more positive emotional states? It's about creating newness, getting curious, learning, doing different things. Because we fall into our habits. So I don't know about you, but I fall into habits. I can have the same cereal day after day. You might end up doing the same reports day after day, and yes, even on weekends. And recognizing that habit, many philosophers have said that that can be the very thing that blunts our aliveness. It's the thing that can just prevent us from getting novel, trying new things, taking a new way to work, watching something different than you'd normally watch if it's a different kind of movie, talking to different people, reading something new, taking a different course, one of those massive open online courses that are free. Try it in a completely new subject, see what comes up. The third area that's most applicable, well, not most, but it's largely applicable to you all, is this idea of being mindful of your leadership legacy. So I want you to think about something right now. You can take a note. Write down 1 or 2, 3 max words that come to mind. If you were to move on in some way, what would your leadership legacy be? How would people describe your legacy? So write down some notes. If you want, put it in the chat, or again, chat me directly. I won't tell us all what you said. What would your leadership legacy be? Meaning, what would people be describing you for, or what would you be known for as a leader or an entrepreneur, any kind of pillar in your community? And I'll tell you what my experience is in working with leaders. Usually this question is a stumper. Maybe you're stumped right now. You got a blank paper in front of you, right? I don't know what my legacy is. And sometimes that's troubling. And I'm being a bit provocative because sometimes I want us to wake up and say, wait a minute, if I don't know what my legacy is clearly, do I want to do some work and think about it? And the answer is maybe. You don't have to. This might not matter to you much. But what could be the thing that, how do you want your legacy to be? I thank you, Rob. You've noted starting Akron Physicians Wellness Initiative, so starting a program. I'll tell you, research shows that when you're reminded of death, it often motivates us to consider what our legacy is, and it causes you to act in ways that are more beneficial for future generations to come. So in the leadership realm, doing this work of memento mori can be really helpful, not only for your own sake, like I look at it on two lenses, right? I look at it personally for your own life and well-being and life satisfaction, but also for the success of your business. And I think of this as, if we are able to tap into something personally that can be motivating for us and encourage us to think about our own experience of being alive, that's a win. But if it can help us make better decisions in our businesses or in the jobs we do, because we're being mindful of future generations, then that can be a bonus. Another way of looking at this around your leadership legacy is, how do you want to be remembered? The obituary is an easy one, right? You can think of it too as how you might be described in a memorial service. But I'd like to go back to thinking about it where you work, right? If you moved on, and let's say it's because you did pass away, the description of how you want to be remembered is key here. And I'll tell you just a quick story about how the Nobel Prizes came to be. So Alfred Nobel, this is back in 1888. His brother Ludwig died. And he went to the paper the next day, opened up the newspaper, and lo and behold, instead of reading Ludwig's obituary, the newspaper accidentally printed the obituary for Alfred, because he was kind of a famous guy in society. And I guess for famous people, they actually have obituaries in waiting, which kind of cracks me up. But they printed Alfred's. And so here's Alfred reading his own obituary. And the headline said, "The merchant of death is dead." Because Alfred Nobel at that time was a merchant in ballistics and dynamite. And a lot of people were not too pleased with him because he was creating things that killed people, basically. And so when he saw the merchant of death is dead, it woke him up. And as the story goes, it really did motivate him to, in some ways, change the path of his life. And that is what helped him to start and leave his enormous fortune to create the Nobel Prizes. So I don't think many of you would have an obituary necessarily that said that you were the merchant of death or something as nasty, but you get the point. How can you use this to your advantage? There's a way of looking at it too around thinking of your legacy, a burden versus benefit. And you know how I said earlier with prospect theory, that we're more motivated by what we have to lose than what we have to gain? It's true here too that highlighting a burden we might leave behind in our business, for example, is often more motivating to fix it than it is to imagine a benefit that we might leave behind. And again, it's just funny. It's the way we're wired. Like for the last two slides, I've asked you to imagine how you want to be remembered in the glowing way, and that thinking that might motivate you. The truth is really kind of like, we're more motivated to avoid pain than to seek pleasure. Same idea here. So you might want to do some work afterwards on, if I left my business, for example, or my department that I run in this company, or even my life outside of business, if I left it in the same regard, would I be leaving a burden for people? Or would I be leaving a benefit? And then how might that edit some of the way that you behave or some of the decisions you make moving forward? Okay. I love this quote. The only difference between a rut and a grave are the dimensions. In light of what we've talked about today, this is where I said I wanted to make it kind of action oriented for you. And it really comes down to, what decision do you need to make about your life today? And by the way, you probably haven't noticed, but this little ball on the bottom right of our screen is the sun setting. It's from my logo. And so it is now petering out because our time is petering out here. What decision do you need to make? And I'm a big fan of it being one small thing. Magnanimous changes work for some people, grand overtures and gestures. If it works for you, great, but it's usually not sustainable. We're in the spirit now of the whole, New Year's resolution and intention time. And some of you might be by January 20th starting to realize, that big thing I lofted upon myself is not really attainable. And let's make this realistic. What's one small thing you can do as a result of our conversation today that might create what I like to call a ripple effect, or the snowball effect, lots of snow going on for you all, or the angle effect. The angle is my favorite. You know, in life, you make one small change today. Maybe it's a widening activity, or maybe it's a deepening endeavor. And you do one thing today, but imagine what it can do for you a month later, years later, on your deathbed, right? That you will avoid potentially some of those regrets. The angle effect, I've seen this happen often with clients. One small example is starting a gratitude journal. It's one of the most well-studied interventions in the science of psychology and positive psychology. Writing down 3 things you're grateful for at the end of every day. Pretty simple, right? Could be tiny stuff, right? Like seeing a new bud on the tree, or yay, we got to have Thai food for dinner tonight. I mean, these are the things that I'm grateful for in life, but it could be big, right? Wow, I landed a huge new account, or whatever it might be for you. But by the gratitude journal, writing down 3 things every night before bed, I dare you to do it. And 30 days later, not tell me that your life has changed for the better. That's an example of one small thing that makes a difference. One small thing for you might be sitting down and thinking more about your legacy and imagining what that might do for the trajectory of your business and for your own sense of fulfillment. By the way, I don't think I made it really clear. The idea about legacy can be important to us because many of us are seeking to feel immortal. We know we can't be, even if you watch the vampire shows. Like, we know this isn't attainable, but there's a symbolic immortality that comes when we leave a legacy behind us. And so here we are, the elephant's in the room, right? The Grim Reaper's here. We've talked all about the idea of how we can make better choices of how we want to spend our time, in awareness that we know we don't have forever, but let's focus on that to be a motivator. And so only you know what it's going to take to feel less like that highly functioning zombie and more towards that astonishingly alive category, even if you're just irking into that quadrant of astonishingly alive. So here's my question, the big question: how do you plan to feel even a little bit more alive by the end of January? So in like 11 days. Think about that, and please start to write your notes. And I would love to see some examples in the chat, please. Tell me how you can do one thing. Some people say, I know I'm going to widen my life by picking up the paintbrush again, or I'm going to start going for a walk after dinner, or I'm going to inquire about volunteering again, or I'm going to research legacy, or there are many ors. But by you entering in ideas in the chat, this is what can actually help inspire other people. I love, someone said, get back to birding. Whoever wrote that, I am getting into birds big time. I'm with you. Apparently it's one of the pandemic activities that has been soaring. Love it. Launch my new venture. Oh my gosh, you've got to do it. And I love how you have the exclamation point. Learning to play pickleball. Hello. It's social and active, which is like a daily double in the world of well-being. More energy from eating healthier. Amen to you. The journal daily. So many great studies around that. Helping with voter registration. Oh, that's a meaningful activity for sure. We've got anybody else? I'm going to give a couple of other moments. Write more, stop procrastinating. Hello. Yep. Accountability is super good, by the way. If you're wanting to write, you know, it's usually this idea that someone in the world cares that you've done your 1,200 words a week, for example. Listening to podcasts that may challenge me, retrying something I used to like as a kid. Carly, that one is massive, by the way. Getting back in touch with the things that used to jazz you up, they usually still do. I mean, I don't know, My Little Pony probably wouldn't, but those activities that you used to find interesting. Meditating, starting a gratitude journal. Thank you for your entries here. I find them personally motivating. I hope the rest of you enjoy reading some of them too. Reading more is a big one I notice. And one of the things I notice actually working with corporate clients is that you might be pretty good at reading the business books, right? And you might like them. That's great. I'm not telling you to stop. However, when was the last time you read a fiction book? Fiction, imagine, or vice versa. And thank you, Leanne. My Little Pony would pump me up. You know what? It actually probably would for me too. I like the idea that there's a habit tracker. Thanks, Leanne, for putting that into the chat. I'm going to check that out later. And so, ways to stay more alive. You can connect with me on my website. I do Monday blog posts on these topics. There's a quiz on the website you can take, which will get you a guide to being alive. As I mentioned earlier, you can email me directly for that longer assessment on being alive. And here is my email here, along with my LinkedIn. Let's LinkedIn. Love to stay connected with you in that way. And I'm going to leave you with a quote. I think it's my favorite quote of all time, although that's a tough one. There are so many good ones out there, but here it is. Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, wow, what a ride. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jodi. It was a pleasure to listen to your observations, your sage advice, and I'm very pleased to see all the engagement from the members of our audience. We do have questions, and thanks again for agreeing to answer them. One that I want to start with, because it is kind of the elephant in the room, how can we widen our lives when the pandemic is making it so tough to do just that?
Mm-hmm. You are right. That is the elephant. And I want to begin even by acknowledging that I think it's probably beneficial for us to accept, right, that our lives are not going to be as magnanimously wide as they could have been and as they will be again. That understanding, okay, there's some narrowing, and I don't want to kind of beat myself up for not finding ways to be amazingly vitality filled in this time. However, there are ways, and it does usually require being a little more creative. And I'm so sensitive to this because now we are into year 2. Well, we're approaching March 15th for me as my date. A long time of trying to find ways to be creative, but sometimes all it takes is one idea that can spark you back. So some of these might be tried and true, but I know many people who have done wonders around getting really innovative with the cuisine, right? Foods that you might be trying something different, getting into different recipes, watching documentaries if you usually watch something different, getting into different kinds of reading, using this as a time to learn and to grow in that way. That doubles into meaning too, but vitality and meaning do often overlap beautifully. But using this as a chance to say, I am going to get curious, which is a real hallmark of well-being. I'm going to get curious about a subject that I've wondered about for a while. And now I'm going to make the use of this narrower time to do that. Same thing around the social side, because the social side has suffered the most. And especially for extroverts, people who do thrive on connections with others more than some of us introverts, the way to stay connected, going out for walks, do the thing where you get to be active, maybe learn something different outdoors. So it does feel at least safe, depending on what's going on for you in your neighborhood for COVID, but partnering up with others, identifying what positive emotions you love the most and finding ways to tap into them. It could be, some people really love getting swept away with inspiration. Well, watch a bunch of inspiring movies and quotes. Same thing around creating new playlists. Like I know some people that go back and they made a playlist from their time in high school just to flash back and have fun, savor the good old days. That is these like low-hanging fruit bits that we can have just to again, feel kind of alive and like we're having fun and some experience. Drive to a different neighborhood, park the car, walk around, observe as though you were on a vacation to a new city. Just a few random ideas there. Yeah.
Great. We have a number of questions, so I'm going to get through these as quickly as I can. For those of us who have lost someone very young, someone who we considered the strongest person ever, what is your advice on handling that daily fear that it could or will happen to you?
What a poignant question. And I am very aware that the experience of grief does complicate the intention to practice memento mori, right? So it's easy to say, as we're sitting here, maybe having lunch, listening, talking, going to get back to work soon, to imagine the end and having it be relatively emotionless. But I acknowledge that there is a lot of complexity when you have lost someone dear. And what that does is, in research, it actually makes you more prone to analyze and make your own mortality a more concrete subject rather than abstract. And so actually, there's more of a benefit of stopping and really going there. And so my advice is that instead of doing the thing we are prone to do, which is try to avoid thinking about it and only focus on the good stuff, I would venture into it. I would venture into the exploration, perhaps with a loved one, having a good conversation or journaling, what it might be like for you and what that would feel like, and be willing to go there and experience the lows, because that's what can help you experience the highs. But I would encourage you to get closer to some of the fear, believe it or not, in order to awaken what can be that appreciation for the life that you still have now. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Question about the calculations that we did and the numbers of years. Why just gender in determining the number of Mondays left? Race and class might affect those results and maybe even give more precise results.
Yes, absolutely. So I make it as simple as possible for the concept point, right? So even just to say 4,000, that's still an average of gender, and yet there are differences. There are differences by country. If you're interested in finding out more, I encourage you to email me, and I will send you a few different resources that I find just fascinating to be able to look at, say, by country, by demographic. There are different implications, of course, by race, but also by marital status, by you name it. And so if you want more, I can give you more, but we were trying to keep it as simple as possible for the sake of the conversation today.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to ask my colleagues in this venture to enter your email address into the chat, because we've had another question about getting the assessment, taking that assessment. And I know you said people just needed to email you and you would send it. So if they can enter your email address in the chat, that would be very helpful.
Oh, sure.
Let's see. How do you quantify happiness in the study of positive psychology?
Oh, no, you're getting me really excited. Well, there are numerous measures. And what I will say is that there isn't one unifying, acceptable definition per se, but it usually does encompass the two dimensions of well-being, which I've kind of covered indirectly with my widening with vitality and deepening with meaning. And so there are two generally accepted ways of looking at happiness. So one is called hedonic happiness, and that does have to do with pleasure, and it really is more associated with feeling good. And then there's eudaimonic well-being, the second kind, which is about, I'm going to simplify it by saying doing good. It's more of the sense of feeling, and that's what I equate to the deepening of the meaning. And so usually there is a combination of positive experience of emotion and that hedonic side of life combined with the eudaimonic side, which is, do I feel like my life has some kind of meaning? And so when you mash them together, there are a few different assessments and tools that can help you to assess kind of where you are at today. And most of the measures around the world, there's a World Happiness Report. Gallup does a tremendous job of measuring across 150 countries, I believe, hugely representative. Most of the questions do boil back down into those two categories, and then we're just talking semantics. But if you want more, again, about those details, just email me and I'll send it off your way. Yeah.
Thank you. You've talked quite a bit today, specifically about wellness and vitality and so forth for leaders and business owners. How do you think this could be reframed for the staff who work for those leaders and business owners? For instance, allowing them to make time for family, passion projects, and mental health.
Yeah. The only difference that I see is eliminating the third component, which is about your leadership legacy. And in fact, I would just substitute leadership legacy, just take the word leadership out and just say, what's your legacy? Because it's the same question, right? How do you want to be remembered in your obituaries and so on? But all of this is applicable to the individual contributors or to folks who are not necessarily big cheeses running the show. As long as we are willing to stop, reflect on our Mondays left, and then truly contemplate what can widen us, what can deepen us. I facilitate these, but I also see leaders doing this on their own accords really successfully, conversations with their team around like what we've done today in a way. What would be examples of how you could widen your life? And you have a whole conversation. And I've seen it where you have virtual bulletin boards, or if you're in person, you can do it in person. What are ways you can deepen? And that leads to usually some really neat things where the team might even engage in things together, right? In widening activities together, where it is around one group I'm working with now, they're doing a potluck thing the last Friday of every month, because they're a whole bunch of different backgrounds and diversities. And so one person's bringing in their Ethiopian cuisine, et cetera. Some groups are doing things where, hey, we're all looking for meaning. So, and this was unique to this group, we're looking for meaning. What if we did something together that helps our community? And so it can be something that individuals can do just as likely as leaders. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have two questions to finish us out. The first one is, fear of death is often cited as a cause for some of humanity's most selfish and short-sighted structures and systems. How can we scale this proactive, pro-aware mindset into our cultural foundation?
Well, whoever wrote that, it's like you just have like a key to my heart. Love that. There is a thing for others who are interested. You've tapped into what's called terror management theory. And because we are afraid of death, when we are faced with it in a more abstract way, right? The funeral procession drives by, random people we know about, we read about, are dying from COVID, these abstract version of salience, it does tend to bring out not the best of ourselves. We double down on our worldviews, we want to bolster our self-esteem, and we do things that are usually a little bit more self-focused. The way to focus on it is how I talked about it around the answer to the person who was grieving somebody who was really close to them, is to be as concrete about it as possible. So stopping, and there are studies that show that people who actually stop, this is going to be really graphic, but people who in this study stopped and actively thought about dying in an apartment fire, that's very specific, I cannot think about it, and really imagining their life, the ending, and what that meant about the life they'd lived, and really thinking about it, those people, that actually sparked pro-social behaviors in those people. And it encouraged them to be more motivated to take action on the things that they had been leaving dormant, like writing the book or playing the trombone, rather than those abstract things, which is what our society is filled with, right? You're going to watch a movie tonight and someone's going to die and it's abstract and it won't do you favors. We need to stop and be really, really focused about it.
Great, thank you. And our last question, on a more lighthearted note, I believe, is, what is your favorite day of the week and why?
Oh, well, it's blasphemous. I'm going to tell you, it's Friday. I should say Monday, but no, you know what? Fridays are fabulous, right? And I just want to give you a quick note on Fridays, because Fridays are still technically a work day for most of us. And yet we love Friday because we know what it represents, right? The evening is just so much anticipation of then the break, the rest, the vitality. The good news is I do not dread Mondays like I did. For many years I did. And then I ended up, when you work for yourself, then sometimes you tend to dread it less, right? But Fridays, all the way.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jodi, thank you so very much for being with us today. On behalf of the Akron Roundtable, it is my pleasure to present you with a contemplative sun as a thank you for your time with us today. While I do not have it here physically, you will be receiving that. The work of art was designed exclusively for Akron Roundtable by Akron artist Don Drum. So again, we want to thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again on Friday, February 17th, for part 1 of our 2-part point counterport series on voting. Thank you and have a wonderful day.